Well, hey, everyone. You've joined us for another episode of CISO Talk. We've got a very special guest, someone that JJ, Jennifer, and I have known for a little while. Before we get there, Jennifer, welcome. It's good to be chatting again, CISO stuff. Always
Absolutely.
fun to talk with you about it. I think we're going to hit the AI topic pretty quickly here, but let's introduce our guest because I don't want to jump the gun. We've got to introduce Anton. Anton Chuvakin is someone that we've known for a fairly long time. He is senior security staff at the offices of the CISO with Google. Welcome, Anton.
Sure. Thanks for having me on the show. It'll be fun.
Absolutely. Will be fun. Tell us a little bit about what senior security staff at the office of the CISO is at Google. Just a little bit of peek into the day and the life of.
So first thing is there's a minor correction to this. It's actually Google Cloud, not Google as such, because I work for Phil Venables, who is the CISO of Google Cloud. And there exists an organization called Office of the CISO, which is kind of has an interesting charter. A lot of what we deal with is kind of customer use of cloud. And I can't say that we are, well, my title is kind of advisor or consultant, but ultimately our charter is to a large extent help clients use Google Cloud and other cloud security. So it's kind of a very broad mandate, and occasionally it veers into more strategic discussion, like transforming somebody's security operations function or transforming their entire security to be in line with the modern times, cloud use. And sometimes things get to be a little more tactical, like I still deal with my good old SIEM and SOC and the detection and response domains. So in some strange regard, those of you who know me from my Gartner days, in some strange regard, my current job a little bit reminds me of my previous job with Gartner, because I do advise clients, and I also do undertake some research and kind of comprehension of various complex topics, including AI security, for the benefit of the clients. So this is as fuzzy as it goes, but I do get to write papers. I share a couple later on, and I do get to talk to clients, and I do get to kind of understand how what we do in security applies to what they have in their environments.
Fantastic. JJ, why don't you kick things off here?
Yeah. Well, you said we wanted to jump in with the AI topic, and I think this is one that's near and dear to everybody's heart, not just CISOs, but I think us just as consumers and people moving about the world, where now we have generative AI and everything is AI driven, even the things that aren't actually AI driven. So, and one thing I think is really interesting is, we have these sort of niche use cases with different applications and maybe in the consumer world. But when we're looking at what we're doing for businesses and the enterprise, especially as it relates to cloud security, I love understanding what's happening at scale, or what's happening so at scale, but also within the viewpoint of the organizations that are servicing those of us that are smaller scale using services. And so I think, a couple of the first questions that we have are whether, regardless of the size of organization, as it relates to AI, what do I have a long list of things CISOs are asking us and me for advisory services, but I'm kind of curious from your viewpoint, seeing it kind of up here, what do you think they should be thinking about or concerned about or planning for?
So this is kind of fascinating, and I'm gonna take it in many different directions. And first thing is, I want to sort of gently push on what they should be asking, because ultimately they are asking some things, and it's almost like, doesn't matter what Anton thinks what they should be asking. So for example, if one of the stories that happened in my line of work is that we looked at some of the questions people are asking, and one of the top questions was about the intellectual property of something that is produced by Gen AI. And my first reaction was, that is not a CISO question. Why are you pushing it to? Why are you coming with that? But ultimately, it does come from CISOs. So I may not think from first principles, whatever they are. Don't really have that many in cyber, I guess. That they shouldn't be asking about this. They should be asking about how to secure the applications, how to secure the use of AI services. But they are asking about that, and in that sense, it matters more what they're actually asking versus what they should be asking. For example, in some other situation, the question was about securing the data as it enters a certain AI-enabled data processing pipeline. And then the question came up of securing the data that comes in and then also filtering the data that comes out. So to me, it's the questions that come up are probably more important than what I think they should be asking. One thing I would say is that my personal obsession in this area was the differences and similarities between securing AI and securing some other complex data-intensive enterprise system. So as a side note, I also run a podcast for us, and I've been kind of obsessed about asking this question of every guest who has anything to do with securing AI. I say, hey, tell me which things from my normal security thinking apply, and tell me which things are new. Because if you follow the media headlines, sometimes your impression would be that it's all new. But in reality, it's also very not true that it's all new. A lot of stuff is very old. Secure infrastructure, using stuff, identity and access management, I don't know, stuff like that. A lot of this is very much the same. So to me, a useful question a CISO should ask, and some do ask that, is securing AI. Give me the pie chart. This is old, this is new. How big is the new sliver? What should I do there? How much of my old stuff really works? And that pie chart that I just imagined would be different for people simply using AI type services versus tuning versus building versus incorporating in applications versus using the raw elements to build their own and train their own models. So to me, the pie chart would change. But the fact that there is a pie chart and the pie and the bigger part of the pie is the stuff you know how to do, you should still do, AI or not. And let's call it a little or smaller chunk of the pie chart would be, yeah, this stuff is new. If you have perfect knowledge of security up to last year, you won't know what to do here. So to me, this is a useful framework. And of course, there's a paper we wrote on this very thing, but ultimately that's a useful question. What's new, what's old?
And what are the top 2 or 3 trends you're hearing from your guests and other people? And what is that new sliver?
So one thing that comes up kind of maybe not all of the time, but often enough is that organizations started figuring out this whole security supply chain and software supply chain and like securing open source software. By the way, this has nothing to do with AI at this point. I'm going to get to the point. And it is kind of line of thinking about the supply chain and what goes into what sort of software you use when you use application X. Do they use libraries from Y and all that? So a lot of this thinking becomes strangely relevant for AI, but in regards to data. Like if you're training something in certain data sets, like where do they come from? Who held them in their hands? What did they do with it? Who made them, who refined them, who filtered stuff. And this, I am not a responsible AI expert. There's a whole other domain and a lot of very intelligent, very well-paid people at Google who do that. But some of this overlaps with responsible AI because certain changes to training data and to other type of data that affect what AI would do have security outcomes, have safety outcomes, have other outcomes. So to me, this type of thinking that to program AI, you use data and you need to treat this data, please don't say data as code, Anton. Treat it as you would software in terms of supply chain security. So this to me is one bucket that I've talked about, thought about, had conversations about, and it's also somewhat misunderstood and unclear. But when we say this is training data and this training data would affect what AI system would do, treat it as you would code in other domains. So this is one bucket.
Your kind of root primitives you sort of mentioned before, if we have those, but data protection, that's not new. Where data
Correct.
lives and how we manage it, and is that going into our models? Is it going into third-party services, just like it might be? Is that going into our database or into a third-party SaaS application?
Mm-hmm.
Not the same exactly, but the same principles kind of apply. And of course, I think you brought up a really good point of, are you consuming and using services, or are you creating your own kinds of applications and models and training, and which is a whole nother level of both knowledge and sophistication, but also you have control over that. And
yes,
so you have
correct.
to secure it. I mean, you could do it insecurely just like you could do anything else in what we do.
Right. And the other side angle to this is that in some cases, if you have the proverbial large, complex enterprise software, you shouldn't really be scared about its output. Ultimately, if you have a CRM system and you piled a bunch of very sensitive data into it, what would come out is probably the same data or some product of that, and you shouldn't be scared of the output. I mean, scared is a little harsh, perhaps, but the point is that output is going to be mostly predictable. For systems with generative AI, you should treat output as maybe not untrusted, but as not fully trusted. So I'm not going to output filter, except for possibly data theft purposes, of my traditional system, but I am going to output filter the system that has Gen AI, right? That sounds sort of obvious, but it's really not for people who are assuming that malicious data may come in and sensitive data may leave. But in this case, malicious data may leave, and that you don't want that. So in that sense, that's probably minor, but it's interesting nonetheless. And I think it's also useful for people who are starting with this type of systems.
You find most questions are coming from people that are trying to build AI into their applications, or is it more consuming AI type services and tying it into their Google applications or third-party apps?
It's a mixed bag. I'm not even sure. At this point, there's another little side angle to your question is, are they trying to use consumer grade services for business? And that to me is probably more applicable to kind of quote unquote the other guy, namely OpenAI in this case, where the whole world rushed in November last year, right, to use ChatGPT and some other stuff for all sorts of fun things. And initially for fun things, and then later on for businessy things. And I have some use cases which I probably won't share that to me should scare people, because this is really not meant for this type of stuff. But people I naturally gravitate into exactly these use cases. And my reaction was, but wait a second, this is very business sensitive data, tricky use case. Why are you using a consumer grade service? You should think that's a little crazy, right? But ultimately, the result is not that surprising, perhaps, that it's kind of they use consumer grade things for business and then think nothing about that. But then what happens with the data? What happens with governance? And they start asking those questions. But the questions may not have any answers because it was not meant for this use. I mean, I don't want to put my, I think I have my Nubler hat back there, and I don't want to put my vendor hat here, but at least in case of Google, it's very clear. If you use Bard, it's consumer grade. If you use Vertex AI, it's business. And we try very hard to clearly steer people to the right things. Now, does it help every time? No. People still say, oh, but we're going to use Bard for this. And it's like, wait a second. That's a consumer service. That's not, no, look over here. And that to me is interesting how, because of this whole bring your own AI adoption route we are observing, these things would happen. And I got into a somewhat fun discussion on LinkedIn with somebody who said, well, it's a little bit like bring your own SaaS application, bring your own cloud. When people whip up a credit card, pay for something, and then they have a business use case. But is it meant for that? That's not always clear to people.
It's not a new problem. We've been dealing with that, is this a consumer product or something business? And it comes with necessarily controls, management, et cetera.
Exactly.
But I think there's a big part of this is the user education. I think this is one of the things a lot of CISOs or whoever is responsible for wrangling this in the environment is trying to deal with, which is it's not a matter of, maybe the office of the CISO or a department or a group related to IT trying to use AI and not knowing how and what to do. I mean, there's definitely some of that, but it's how do you keep someone in HR or someone with access to your CRM or your sales records, or someone with access to, even in the operational technology space, I've learned this is kind of a big deal where they're trying to automate some analysis by feeding what is in that space very proprietary information related to like Modbus protocols into these consumer engines. And so I'm assuming, short of redirecting users, if you try to go to this, consumer grade the site, we're going to shoot you over to a little blurb that says, hey, we use this tool, go talk to so-and-so about accessing it. Are there other things in place or strategies to deal with that?
So I feel like a lot of this is still emerging. When people started using a wide range of SaaS services for business, probably like 10, maybe more than 10 years ago, technologies like CASB, a few others appeared, which were meant to serve as kind of a filter for that. And as a funny aside, the podcast we recorded today with somebody was about SaaS security, and somebody said, I think LLM would trigger an even wider, even broader software as a service ecosystem, and somebody will have to deal with all that. Because if it's a AI-powered notepad or AI-powered image processing of some sort, you may not be looking at dozens, you may be looking at hundreds, and they would all have some form of Gen AI or other AI inside. So to me, this is a kind of a fascinating / scary area, and I feel like when people are launching those startups to secure all that, there is a point in that. There is some startups do look like features, but ultimately, there is a new world being born, and that's very much very real.
I feel like our concern, at least from my point of view, is I'm less concerned about somebody throwing a bunch of text and bullet points in and asking for a better marketing blurb for an event or an email, and more concerned with that proprietary data being fed into an engine that, just like you said, with the supply chain and other applications, who has access to that, who had their hands on it at what point. And then you have the whole kind of worrying about not just the garbage in, but now you might have kind of the garbage out happening.
Right. And I think that this whole gems in and then somebody else looks at your gems. Yeah, that's probably like the other problem. And I think this is solvable. I'm not really an expert in how we solve some of this kind of IP related stuff. Like I read the materials, but I don't have the depth on knowing this. I know that, for example, recording prompts versus not recording prompts, using prompts to retrain versus not using prompts to retrain is a big part of that. Like ultimately, if you don't use any of the data to enrich the model, then you're safe from that particular risk. You may be not safe from other risks, whatever they are, but at least that risk is cleanly taken care of.
So I'm going to, Mitch, if you're cool with that, since we have Anton here, I have a lot of other questions around just moving to the cloud, and we have a lot of organizations now. I think we've hit this stride where we're past the early adopters, and now we're into most organizations are trying to move some or all of their operations into the cloud. And I know that's an area you've worked heavily in for some time now. So I'm curious about your viewpoint of the trends in that space, where the stumbling blocks are, and where you think maybe the maturity curve is for a lot of organizations who are making that move. Any thoughts on that?
So yes, I first I'll probably share a somewhat embarrassing story first that's connected to this.
We love embarrassing stories.
and yes, later it became a more tame blog, which I'm happy to share. But ultimately, the initial embarrassing story was I had one too many conversations from people who sort of mostly follow the on-premise blueprint in the cloud, which, yes, they lift and shift IT, they lift and shift security, they do firewalls and IDS and network packet capture and EDR and everything that they've built in their data centers in the last 30 years, they take with them to cloud, and then they replicate all that on the IT they had on-premise in the cloud. And the initial reaction that I had was, it's not 2013. Why are you doing it? Like, why? Yeah, sure. In the early days of cloud, it was probably natural to use it as a call because people didn't have anything better. But like this whole universe of cloud native and microservices and containers and all the fun stuff. And I was kind of pretty close to shaming some security leader in one conversation when they said, it's 2003. Why are you using the on-premise blueprint for cloud? Like, I was really kind of frustrated and kind of like, maybe not angry, but like kind of like my reaction was like, that is stupid. And the person who was actually older than me, and hopefully, and as it turned out in a minute, wiser than me, looked at me and said, Anton, we are not using the on-premise blueprint for cloud because we think it's great, because we think it's the right way. We use it because that's the only one we know. At which point I said, okay, yes, this is like one of those Buddhist stories. And then he got enlightened. And that was my moment of like, and then I got enlightened. I stopped shaming people for not being cloud native enough in 2023, because in many cases, the organizations are following the blueprint that they grew up with since, I don't know, the 70s, 80s, 90s, pick a date. And their journey into the cloud is very much based on an on-premise blueprint. And it is not, they don't need shaming, they don't need motivation. They need to know how to actually do it, how to actually transform to be maybe a little bit more cloud focused, cloud native, whatever the term we use, and then grow from that. Rather than to just say, ha, 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 you're copying VM from a data center to cloud. That's stupid. Like, that's not the way to go, ultimately saying this, because that's for many organizations, it's the only route they know. And so instead, I focused on figuring out how we can remap their mental models to cloud security. And the blog I mentioned was how CISOs need to adapt their mental models for cloud security. And that was my revelation after that discussion, that ultimately we need to very gently explain, okay, you want to do a DMZ. You've lived with DMZs for many years. You know their firewalls. There's a public side, private side. You want to replicate it in the cloud. Okay, so in the cloud, to achieve the same outcome, you would use this thing instead. And they'd be like, oh, okay, oh, is it better? Yes, it's much better for this reason. It's also cheaper because of hardware. And they would say, okay, yeah, I get it. So DMZ is that thing. Okay, yep, thank you. And then we say, okay, well, what about this configuration assessment scanner? Yep, we have that. That's called this thing in the cloud, and it does check your configurations for your applications, for your platform, for this other stuff. Oh, okay, so we still need to do this. Yeah, that's called CSPM, whatever. And it's just like what you had in the 90s with a configuration scanner from whatever vendor. And they say, okay, yep, that makes sense. And then this story needs to continue so that people with predominantly or exclusively pre-cloud mental models of security would grow into that type of, that's what it means in the cloud. So to me, this was a big part. And there are absolutely companies who follow the on-premise blueprint to cloud in 2023. And no, shaming them is not the way to go. It's this type of slow and somewhat detailed-oriented education for both subject matter and also the kind of concepts and models of what cloud really means and what are the ways to achieve the same outcomes rather than just with the equivalent controls. Equivalent controls ends up being a little bit off, because if I say, what's EDR in cloud land? Well, you can put EDR on the cloud, on the cloud instance. And then people say, whoa, wait a second. We don't have cloud instances. We're going to be microservices. Okay, so then EDR is a deeper visibility beyond logs from this system. Okay, so you probably should use this. So, and that conversation may need to happen many times. It would be frustrating sometimes, but ultimately it almost has to happen.
Makes sense. And I think, so let me ask this. I think there's obvious on-ramps to using cloud services like email and things like G Suite for businesses. And we've seen a lot of that on the education side for forever. What is the next couple of steps for an organization, like based on what you've seen from an adoption standpoint? Okay, we've gotten these few services in the cloud. Where do you feel like that next kind of big jump or hurdle is for them? Learning curve.
Oh, so the scenario you have in mind is somebody who maybe ran his own exchange since the 90s to 2022. And in 22, they switched to Workspace or some other SaaS email, and their days of managing their own email were gone. So what should they do next? Like, that's roughly what you're asking?
Yeah. What do you see as that next adoption kind of milestone?
I mean, it strongly depends on the company. A lot of people really started not from email, but maybe from infrastructure. They started saying, okay, these are my applications. I'm going to refactor the app for the cloud, or maybe I'll migrate it to the cloud, copy, lift and shift it to the cloud, and then slowly refactor. That's often what they want, but not what they do. But I don't think there's any one adoption lineup. Like I've seen people move applications that deal with even sensitive data because they realize that cloud is perhaps more secure than their data center. But I think email is kind of the only easy, obvious, don't run your own Exchange server, that's crazy kind of bucket. Other things to me are more nuanced. At least that's my sort of unprepared remark to this.
Yeah, it just depends on the application. That makes sense.
It also seems if you're in your certain point in your cost cycle, right, you're allocating dollars to more hardware, more this. It's like, okay, that's also a natural time. It was for me, first time I moved up to the cloud was, I'm not going to budget for hardware refresh in 2 years. We're going to do it this way. Let's see if we can do it. And that was, that's been a while. Now we know you can do it, but it seems like that might also be, there's some financial incentives to say, can we save money? Can we do things differently? Can we economize? Or are there capabilities we would have there in the cloud we don't have in our own data center today? Right.
And then people who would still be very attracted to replicating what they have on premise in the cloud. Again, the idea is to sort of point out that there would be things that give them exactly the same outcomes, likely better, almost certainly cheaper, compared to copying their entire stack. Because at this point, cloud is, depending upon how you count, maybe 15, 17 years old, depending upon the first date you would consider the birth of public cloud. There's already a lot of stuff known how to do things better. And some people would say, no, we're still going to go with the on-prem route. And you tell them, okay, if it's the first step, maybe that's okay. But here's where you would be kind of wasting time, or you'd be either protecting against threats that can never materialize, or you'd be investing in things that are very inefficient compared to a very efficient cloud native way. No judgment. And no shaming, but kind of pointing out that some of these things will be suboptimal, and some of them are suboptimal from the effectiveness point of view. Some of them are quite fine from the effectiveness point of view, but are very wasteful from economic point of view. So in that sense, can you copy every single packet of every single link from one cloud inside your cloud use? Yes. You can copy every single packet from within your cloud, your east-west within cloud effectively. I can copy it on disk. I can dump it on disk. I can save it. I can keep it for a year. Is it a good idea, given that much of it is encrypted? No. Would you be able to understand what it all means? No. Are there tools that would give you that at an enormous expense? Yes. So make your own decisions in this case.
It sounds like the lesson you're kind of sharing is, look, things are different, but you just need to map it. What you know is this is done this way now. And some things maybe architecturally, structurally, you might be quite different. A lot of things aren't that different, right?
Yes, correct.
Still basically a firewall, but it's done a little bit differently in the cloud. And, you're not setting up the networking exactly the same. And VPNs or VPCs or whatever kind of services that replace that. And they have other characteristics about it. So it's just that learning curve of mapping what you know and maybe finding out the new things, new ways of doing things.
Yes. And that's why we sort of have this on our podcast. Tim and me immediately jump on every guest who says something vaguely similar to cloud is just somebody else's computer. Because this is the line we hate with a passion. And we hate it with a passion because of the word just. Because obviously cloud involves somebody else's computers. We're not going to argue with that. We have a lot of excellent computers in a lot of Google data centers. That's not the point. The point is the word just. Cloud is not just somebody else's computer, even though it involves somebody else's computers. There's a lot of stuff that was built the cloud native way that just gives you results better and faster, but different. And that part is the reason we hate this line so much.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I don't. To me, that's a line. And I'm not degrading anyone, but if someone says that, probably means they're doing things the way they did it in the data center in the cloud.
Yes.
Or they haven't yet seen the other things they can do in the cloud that you couldn't practically have done in your own data center because of the resources and service. Yeah. So it's just a matter of learning those things.
Yes,
and the world in the world I come from with some of the network security stuff, this manifestation is there's a very clear line. And I'm not going to name any company names, but I will say that, for example, there's one partner, like one manufacturer that I've worked with for many years, and another company came up later, and they had cloud native architectures. And the first company said, well, we have cloud native architectures. We run on microservices. We're using AI. We're doing this and we're doing that. And I still co-manage some environments in both of these and other vendor spaces, right? So I'm just going to look at these two. This one, the first one, who's been in business for a long time and supposedly is running on microservices, I still get notifications of massive outages, planned outages for updates of the entire whole sections of the system. Just
that's
like
the opposite of, that's the opposite of.
I know. But it's funny because it's like there's this blurring of the lines.
Think about the analogy. It's almost like you bought a gas car, but they say you have to buy a manure removal service. And you say, that's not a horse. You sold me a car. And they say, nope, manure removal service is mandatory. And it's like, what? Wait, how? What?
Yep. So it's basically the equivalent of they have taken something that was on-prem that they had for many, many years, and they lifted up into the cloud without retooling it for such, compared to the company that just came along later, built the entire architecture in a cloud native way. And there's, you might go in and maybe for a few seconds, there's a weird blip when they click a button in like one interface and a change log, and they push updates every couple of weeks. So it's like it manifests in very tangible ways to us that are consuming those technologies.
Yes. And we still have, I without naming the names, I do recall a similar conversation with somebody actually in a SIM land, in a security information and management land, when somebody built a cloud SIM, but they had to do a lot of this type of wait, we need to buy servers. And it's like, does Google Workspace or Office 365 or something tell you, don't edit this doc, we need to buy the servers. Wait, we're going to buy servers. Okay, we're installing them. Like, that's not how cloud works. And if your cloud service requires you to have advance notice for buying servers, then it's really not a cloud service. Yeah.
So speaking of SIM, because when I first met you, Anton, I think you were coming out of the PCI world and into a lot of SIM tooling that blossomed into other stuff. I think throughout your time at Gartner. Are you working on anything like that in your current? Do you advise on that with clients who are looking to do that type of a data analysis? And is that in the cloud? What are you doing in that space now?
So I do deal with, obviously Google owns Chronicle, Google Cloud owns Chronicle, and that's a pretty good software as a service SIM, very modern. And, I can say other good things but I won't, because again, I'm not trying to be a vendor here. So I do deal with how clients are evolving to use more modern tooling, evolving to use more maybe software as a service type tooling for SIM. Even SIM migration from on-premise to cloud is kind of a long journey, because if I recall correctly, the first truly cloud-native SIM or SIM-like log collection platform was built roughly in 2013-14. That was Sumo Logic. Right? No, that's a long time ago. And even today, we have people who kind of struggle with mostly on-premise thinking for what they use a SIM for. Or you have people with kind of like a fake cloud SIM, which is basically the vendor lift and shift their own SIM to a public cloud and then sells the result as a cloud service, which affects how it operates. It affects what you can do with it and what you can't do with it. But apart from this tech stack side, I also see a lot of people transforming their security operations centers, not just SIMs, but like transforming the SecOps to a more modern model, maybe more engineering-led model when they can scale better. And for a lot of this, we end up relying on some of the Google lessons of how Google did things a good number of years ago and what it came out to be. Now, an initial take that people had is when we shared how we do things, they say, well, a great story, but we're not Google. So like, why does any of this apply to us? And that was before I joined. And then after I joined, I kind of said, wait a second, we still have something good, but we need to make it portable. So what we now call autonomic security operations, or ASO, is ultimately this portable version of some of our detection and response lessons, which are usable by others. And autonomic, by the way, does not mean without humans. It's kind of more akin to autonomic nervous system and adaptability and stuff. It's not about like fire the humans. But the point is that it's the lessons that are made portable and they can be used by more people. And that to me comes up a lot because many organizations may modernize the tooling, but the processes for detection and response are still very much, give me a big screen, give me a SOC level 1 analyst, give me a level 2, give me an escalation. Oh no, this is all very expensive. I need to use an MSSP. Like a lot of this is still in this bucket, and ultimately that's not the only choice, and there are other choices, and we try to enlighten and educate and inform people with the ASO model so that they know there are other ways to do it. And when people hear about some of the results and some of the scaling humans using automation that we achieved, they do realize that, wait a second, that's not the only way to go. So that's been occupying some part of my time for sure.
Very good. Well, I wish we had about another hour and a half or 2.5 days. I think actually would be better to sit down and talk, kind of like we used to do at those conferences. Maybe we'll be at those again soon, run into each other. Anton, it's been fantastic. We hope you'll come back and chat with us. We're always interested in sort of what conversations we're all having and sharing that amongst each other and with our customers, our own infrastructure, et cetera. It's been super helpful. So thank you for being with us. Where can people find out about your podcast?
Well, it's there's a bit of a story there. So our podcast is called Cloud Security Podcast by Google, and we had a lot of really cool naming ideas for a podcast. We did not set out to name our podcast Cloud Security Podcast, but I mean, I swear it is not what we wanted. But
you get an A for clarity, though.
That's true.
Yes, but this is what the naming team. This is what the naming team said. Because ultimately, they said, "Oh, all your cool, quirky, funny names like weathering security and whatnot, you can take them out and keep them as souvenirs for your home use. But if it's our podcast, you're gonna get a Cloud Security Podcast name because what you want to do is a Cloud Security Podcast." At which point we said, "This is boring," and they said, "But it's very factual." At which point we surrendered. And that's how we ended up the proud owners of Cloud Security Podcast by Google. Very creative name.
I think people will be able to figure out where to find it. Just Google it, right?
There's that, yes.
So many thoughts there.
Who would have thought? What a way to conclude the conversation. Just Google it.
And Anton, I will find that blog with this. You said the mental map for CISOs for cloud. So I will. The mental model. So I'm going to find that too, and we'll link that as well here.
Awesome.
That'd be super helpful. Well, great. Coming back again soon, Anton. Jennifer, any parting thoughts before we wrap things up here?
Oh,
you're good.
That's tricky. I'll make one parting thought is probably back to cloud use. While AI and LLMs and all this exciting stuff is exciting, I still see a lot of companies that for whom the cloud is the new technology, not LLM. And to me, I am very happy to be involved with some of the stuff around security and AI, but I want to never lose sight of the fact that for some companies, 2023 is when they first saw cloud. Yep. And they need help, and they need to do things in a secure manner and in a way that doesn't lead them to breaches in the coming years.
The journey is all relative to where you are, right?
Yes, exactly.
Exactly. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. We'll be back with another great episode of CISO Talk. We'll see you again soon.